What is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? It's your boy Goblin, and today we're coming in with yet another Hoot and a Holler, a long-awaited, classic, long-vaulted Goblin story. Now, vaulted in the sense that this was never ever told, and it's an old one, and I feel like it should have been told sooner. But it wasn't for the same exact reasons that my sneaking drugs into rehab video was told so much later, right? Because I couldn't tell that stuff at the time. But ladies and gentlemen, it's way later now. It is years later than when this stuff took place, and I don't live with my parents anymore, so we can tell a lot of these crackhead stories that I had to hide from my YouTube channel. And this is one of the first ones. Hope you guys enjoy. Drop a like if you do. And also, I apologize if I cough at any points or, sound a little different. My throat's a little scratchy today. I don't really know why, but it's just my throat. Like, there's nothing else wrong with me, but my throat just hurts like a bitch today. It's kind of fucked, dude. Maybe I'm getting the Rona. Who knows, bro? Ronies again, dude. Ronies for like the 10th time, boys. Another Corona scare. Hey, either way, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let's dive right into it. So, this happened a long time ago. This happened way back in the beginning of 2017. And at this point, I had just gotten out of residential treatment and I had begun my outpatient rehab, right? And I was also on probation at this point. And when this particular story took place, I was nearing the end of my time in outpatient. I would say I was only an outpatient for maybe 2 more weeks after this. And I was in it for a total of probably 2 months after I got out. It was not a short-term thing. It was kind of short-term. Not really. But either way, one of the requirements for our outpatient treatment was they would make us go to AA or NA meetings, right? They didn't really care which, but we had to go to these meetings and bring back proof that we actually attended them. It was one of the requirements, or else they'd hold you back in treatment and they'd be real dicks about it. They were more hard ass about going to the meetings than they were about pissing clean. It was kind of strange, but either way, we had to go to these AA meetings, and in our area, there was only a few on certain days, and everyone in my outpatient kind of tended to go to the same 1 or 2 different AA meetings, right? So there was one that took place in the basement of a church. I think I might have talked about this, going to this AA meeting a few times in a long time ago in the past, but I'd been to the AA meeting at this church quite a few times, and on this particular day, I go to the meeting. I think it was a weekday. I remember. I think it was like a Tuesday maybe. I remember they did it on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I believe it was. But I believe it was a Tuesday. But either way, I go to this church and I go to the AA meeting and I go down in the basement. And there's a kid from my outpatient who I'm pretty good friends with who we're going to call Sam. Now, there's a couple other people from my outpatient who were there too, but none of them I was really friends with like I was Sam. Sam and I, we got along really well. We joke around. We had similar senses of humor. We liked the same drugs. He's a big psychedelic kind of guy. He was a total crackhead. But the difference between him and I was that I was a little more low-key at this point. I was playing off the whole I'm sober image to everybody, including the people in my rehab. So this guy at this point didn't know that I was really trying to do anything. This guy probably thought I was actually trying to be sober, and then he ruined it, which we'll get to later. But either way, he was a cool guy, and I got along with him very well. So as soon as I saw him, I dap him up. I'm like, my dude, how are you doing? Good to see you here. This is going to be a fun time, right? And he's like, yeah, dude, I can't wait for the smoke break. Because half the reason that any of us ever went to AA meetings was just for the cigarette breaks. We can go bum cigarettes off people. Because none of us were of age yet, right? At this point, we were all young as fuck. I had just turned 18. So I was one of the only people who could actually buy cigarettes here. But besides that, everyone else couldn't buy cigarettes at all. But I had just turned 18, so I could get cigarettes at this point. But I still would like to bum them off people at the AA meeting. I was in there with the crowd of people who hadn't turned 18 yet, so they, I just blended in. I just bummed my squares, saved my smokes. It was all fine and dandy. But either way, I'm chilling out with Sam. And I noticed as soon as I dap him up that he seems a little different than he does in session. I very rarely see him outside of outpatient, and this was one of the first times that I saw him outside at an AA meeting. I think I'd only seen him at one other AA meeting prior to this, and he was I'm pretty sure he was sober at that other one. But this one, I could tell he was a little off. He was talking a little... I don't want to say he was slurring his words, but he was just talking slowly. He was holding his letters, you'd be like, hello. Like he'd like just hold the letters a little too long and it would sound funny. So I knew that something was up with him. But either way, we have our seat and the AA meeting begins. And how it starts out is these AA meetings would always start out the same way. They'd give everyone a chance if they wanted to make an announcement or say anything. There was a lot of people who they would just announce like, oh, I'm fucking 400 million days sober today. And then everyone else claps for them. Or they'd be like, yo, I jacked off this morning, guys. And, everyone claps. It's stupid shit like that, right? I mean, not literally I jacked off. You know what I fucking mean, all right? So it gets through that part of the meeting, and we start the actual meeting. And listen, every AA meeting is different. Because I've been to rehab a bunch, I've gone to a lot of Alcoholic Anonymous meetings, right? A shitload of them. I figure I should clarify, by the way, for those of you guys who don't know what an AA meeting is, it's Alcoholics Anonymous, right? But I figured most people know what an AA meeting is, right? It's a pretty, universal thing, I feel like. But back on topic. So, either way, we kind of start off, and this AA meeting was really disorganized. Like, they never really had any plan. It was just like if someone felt like speaking, they could just do it. So it would always kind of devolve into someone going on some long rant about how hard of a time they're having to stay sober, and then a bunch of other people would end up clapping for them. That's pretty much what it would devolve into every single time. So Sam and I are sitting next to each other, and Sam is he's not paying any attention at all, dude. He is just absolutely not giving even the slightest thought to this shit. And finally, our first cigarette break comes around, and we go outside, and Sam and I go bum some smokes off this girl who's standing there. And we're going to call this girl, what are we going to call her? We're going to call her Sophie. So we bum these smokes off Sophie, and it's pretty chilly out, right? It's the beginning of the year. It's winter. So I'm like, yo, we can go smoke these squares in my car if you guys want. And Sam is hype at the idea of that. Sam's like, bet. And Sophie's like, oh, yeah, let's go. So we go, and we sit in my car. And listen, I had known Sophie, I wouldn't say we were friends at all, but I'd known her first name through bumming smokes off her at prior AA meetings, right? So, I would say I was kind of flirty with her a little bit. She was a pretty lady. We chatted up on the cigarette breaks, but we weren't really friends or anything. I didn't know her well at all. And it definitely got blown by what's about to happen, any chances I had. So, we get in my car, and Sophie hops in the back seat, and then Sam hops in a shotgun. And we're chilling in my car. And we're just smoking these cigarettes. And Sam reaches in his pocket. And he looks over to me and he's like, yo, you said you like K, right? And I look over to him and I'm like, yeah, I did. Because whenever we'd be in our outpatient meetings, every day we'd start off with announcing our drug of choice. So I would always mention how I would do, acid and ketamine were some of my favorite things to do. I would talk about K in particular a lot at this point. So he was like, yo, you like K, yeah? And he pulls out this fucking baggie. And he just does a bump. He doesn't say anything after pulling it out. He just pulls it out and he pours it on his phone, right? And he just dumps it. And it's one of these tiny little dime bags, you know what I'm saying? And he pours some on the back of his phone. And he's got a straw in his pocket, and he just rails it. And I was like, holy shit, this kid just pulled out the crackhead kit. Pardon me, I just said pit. I'm stoned. Whatever. Either way, okay. So I'm looking, I'm just like, holy fuck, I can't believe what's happening. All the while, I'm so focused on what he's doing, I'm not even processing that Sophie's in the back seat. I'm not even computing. And I don't really think that she understood what was happening quite yet. So she's sitting in the back seat. And Sam passes the phone over to me. And he's like, you want some? And at this point, I'm sitting there and I'm like, holy fuck. Because, listen, I hadn't done anything since rehab at this point. I hadn't done any substances since rehab, right? I had snuck in some drugs for a homie, yeah, but I hadn't really been fully zooted. I'd maybe gotten some head rushes here and there, or, had some placebo effects off snorting some shit that I shouldn't have during rehab, but I hadn't really done any actual drugs like this. So this opportunity just being yanked out of this guy's ass in a church parking lot during an AA meeting sent me for a whirl. And honestly, I was a little scared. I was like, damn, bro, should I really do this? And I sat there and I paused for a minute. And once he hands the phone over to me, I think Sophie realized what was going on. And she's like, can you guys let me out of the car? And she just blurts that out immediately. She's just like, can you guys let me out of the car, please? Like, she said it in a very irritated tone. And Sam gets out a shotgun. He lets her out, and she just fucking storms off. You can tell that she was not happy at all. So once she storms off, I'm like, oh, fuck, dude. Like, wait. I just had lost track of the fact that she was even in the car for this. So I was like, holy shit. Like, wait, she witnessed that. We're supposed to be sober. What if she goes in there and like says something on some hold us accountable bullshit in front of our other group mate? We're fucked. But I wasn't thinking like that at the moment, right? I was having those little, kind of beginning of that kind of thought in the back of my head. But I was like, you know what? Yes. I will do some K. Because it was K and I couldn't resist. Dude, listen. After just smoking a cigarette, right? Freshly off smoking a square, right? And she smoked Marlboro. Sophie bummed us a Marb, so it was a good kind, too. It wasn't a bum smoke. It was a nice smoke, right? It was a good smoke. I don't know what went through me, but I straight up couldn't resist. And I was like, yeah, give me a really small bump. I was like, literally, I want to barely feel it. I was like, give me the smallest bump ever, right? The tiniest shit. So he did. He gave me probably the smallest bump of K I've ever done in my life, but it felt amazing. I remember after being sober for a hot minute, and listen, throughout this time, I will say, right? I think one thing that's important to touch on is in my old 2017 videos, I always mentioned how I was sober during this time period. And the reason being is because I had to, because my parents and my counselor knew my channel. I would have gone back to rehab or gotten kicked out of my mom's house if they found out I was not sober at this point. But the one thing that I actually stayed sober on all year was weed. Weed I couldn't smoke all year, but there was no feasible way I could have done that without at least, popping a pill here and there, or railing a little line of something here in there, and this was the first instance of that. So I take this tiny little bump and instantly I just feel this tranquil bliss feeling come over me, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is the K I remember. And it wasn't the best ketamine at all, right? It really clogged up my nose. It didn't go down smoothly, and it didn't really taste quite right. The taste was like ketamine, but it wasn't quite strong enough. It was not as crystally as it was powdery, and it was definitely cut as fuck. But it felt like K. It felt close enough to K where I was like, you know what? This is good for me. So I do my bit, and Sam hops back in the car, right? Sam hops back in the car, and I just take my little fucking pinch of it, right? And he's back in the car at this point, and I hand the phone back to him, right? And Sophie's gone, right? Sophie's completely gone, like I mentioned earlier. And he goes back in. He pours a little more out onto this phone, and he rails a fatter bit. He rails like a whole thicky line of this shit. And I'm looking over, and I'm just like, holy shit! Like I didn't know Sam was like this, bro. He plays it all like. Granted, I knew he didn't give a fuck about the test, but of course the counselors will never tell you what, they're pissing dirty for. They'll just announce in group therapy like, oh, so Sam, you pissed dirty again, but they'll never say what, right? They'll never tell us what. So I just thought Sam was hitting the blunt on the weekends. I didn't know this kid was railing K at fucking AA meetings and shit. So I was like, damn, bro, this kid's going cuckoo. So we hop back out of the car and we go back into this AA meeting, and we sit down next to each other once again. And we're very late from the cigarette break, and I just look over at Sophie, and she gives me just the dirtiest, filthiest, fucking stinkiest glare I've ever gotten in my life. And as soon as I received that glare, I was like, bro, this is about to get fucking weird, dude. So we're chilling out, and I walked in the middle of some conversation that I wasn't really paying attention to. But Sam and I sit down, and eventually Sophie starts talking. And she talks, listen, I've never been subtweeted in person until this instance. I've never felt such a passive-aggressive attack until this instance. But Sophie goes on this whole, speech about how, people in her personal life are making it so hard for her to stay sober, and there's temptation around her, and there's people trying to put her on the wrong path. And I just keep looking at her, and we just keep making this brief eye contact and then looking away, where I know that I triggered her to say this. I know that Sam and I made her say this, and I'm just like, oh my god, bro, I'm just on a little pinch of ketamine, just a little speck of K. Why can't you just be friendly to me? All right, I just want to have a good time. Meanwhile, Sam is literally fucking drooling next to me, right? I look over at Sam. He's literally got his head tilted back. He's out cold. There is drool on his mouth. His mouth is fucking wet. I don't know what it is with ketamine and drooling, bro. Like, all my homies who would do too much K and pass out would always start drooling off the shit every single time. But either way, so we're sitting through this meeting, and this motherfucker's drooling. So I'm like, okay, this guy's out cold. So I'm sitting through the rest of this AA meeting. Another cigarette break comes by, and I try to wake up Sam, and he won't wake up, right? He will not get the fuck up. And I'm like, I'm just trying to nudge him, and I'm like, bro, come on, let's go get this cigarette, right? Let's go smoke. And he just will not get up for me, right? Like, he's responsive, right? But he just won't. He doesn't want to get up. But at the same time, he's not quite responsive enough where I felt comfortable leaving him alone. Because I felt like someone else would have came in and realized he was fucked up and tried to, like, call an ambulance or some dumb shit, They would have been, like, some straight edge motherfuckers would have been like, oh, call an ambulance. Not like, oh, come on, let's just smoke some weed and do more K, Like a real man should handle it. So, either way, I end up staying in there, and I sit next to him. And he kind of comes to, while everyone else is out smoking their cigarettes, he kind of comes to a little bit more. He's still very out of it and droopy, but he's a little more responsive. So I'm like, all right, bet. Did a little too much K. Maybe he got K-holed. Who knows? We're fine now. So everyone comes back in from the second smoke break, and it's basically just a conclusion after this, right? They're like, okay, we meet again at this time, see you guys in the next one. Here's our plans for upcoming events, and all this AA fancy shit, right? So they're doing all that, and finally the meeting's over. And Sam has worked up the ability to be a little more functional. He can complete sentences. He can stand up. So I stand up and I kind of help him up. And the other kids in our outpatient group, right? They're kind of looking at us. But like I said, I never interacted with these other kids that were in there very much. So they didn't really bat an eye at what we were doing. Because this was a big AA meeting too. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but there was like minimum 40 people in this basement. This was not a small AA meeting by any means, so we could blend into the crowd relatively easily. But either way, I get Sam up and we walk back out to the parking lot, and I realize really quickly this kid is not driving. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. He's like K-holed right now. This kid's not driving. So we get in my car, right? I'm like, yo, Sam, I'm going to give you a ride. And he's just like, all right. And he gets in my car and I ask for his address. And he realizes once he gives me his address, he's like, wait, like I drove here. Like I'll just drive home. And I'm like, bro, you're straight K-hold, bro. Like I just watched you drool on yourself for like an hour. So you're good, dude. Like, just Uber here tomorrow or some shit, bro. You're fine, right? So either way, he's like, all right, whatever, yada, yada. And it turns out he didn't live that far. He only lived, like, maybe 15 minutes from the church, 15 give or take. So I cruise him home. I drop him off. By the time we get back to his house, he's a little more sobered up, and he's like, yo, thanks for the ride, bro. He's like, that was fun, dude. Hit me up if you're ever trying to do some shit. And I'm like, oh, yeah, for sure. And the whole time I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of feeling a little guilty. I can't lie, Like, this is my first experience out of rehab doing a substance. And I can't lie, I felt like shit, dude. I cannot lie. I felt really guilty after. Mainly because, I don't know, I guess, like, I didn't want my mom finding out I was doing drugs again, because she seemed, low-key, it's kind of sad to think about, she seemed a little proud that I was sober, and here I am doing ketamine at the AA meeting. What are you going to do? Classic Goblin, dude. It is what it is. But, hey, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Drop a like if you did. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.